Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Smile. My guest today is Dr. Edith Shiro, a clinical psychologist, author, and internationally recognized expert in trauma, resilience, and post-traumatic growth. For more than 3 decades, Dr. Edith has worked with individuals, families, and communities navigating the impact of trauma, including refugees and survivors of torture. Her work is also deeply informed by her own family history as the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors and Syrian refugees. She is the author of The Unexpected Gift of Trauma, The Path to Post-Traumatic Growth, in which she shares a powerful 5-stage framework for moving through trauma. At the heart of Dr. Edith's work is the understanding that while we may not choose what happens to us, healing can become an opportunity to break generational cycles, reconnect with who we truly are, and transform our pain into purpose. Dr. Edith Shiro, welcome to Behind the Smile. How are you today?
Thank you so much for this wonderful invitation. Very happy to be connecting with you today.
I'm so excited for this conversation. I have been reading through your book and the work that you do and the impact that you're having on the world. And I just know that you're going to add so much value to our audience, to our listeners here today. So let's dive straight into the conversation. Dr. Edith, the word trauma is quite well known now. I think in the last sort of couple of decades, we've gone from not really talking about it to people using the word trauma in their everyday lives. But could you describe for us, in terms of how you view the word trauma and its impact, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, no, and thank you for that question because, as I've been working with it, doing research with it, I've really been expanding the concept. And at the beginning, maybe 25 years ago, when I would talk about trauma, people had a strong reaction. Nowadays, it's part of our everyday kind of conversation, sometimes even overly used. But the way that that we work with trauma now, and the way that I use the definition is in this way. Anything, any event that shatters or breaks your understanding of yourself, of the other, of the world, something that shatters or breaks your value, your belief system, for which you don't have the resources or the tools to deal with. And it can be even an invisible experience, an invisible wound. So what makes it traumatic is not just the event itself, but how it shatters and breaks the relationships around you and how it really undoes the belief system that you have about how the world works, or it takes away the innocence of the way that you understand yourself, your family, your relationships, the world. And sometimes what happens is that you don't have the actual resources or the tools to deal with it. And this is when we start developing trauma responses. So it's not just the event, but everything else that happens with it.
And what do you mean by trauma responses? What could that look like?
So the trauma responses are, believe it or not, responses that we have wired in our nervous system to deal with danger, with situations that are threatening to us, and we know exactly how to respond in survival mode. And I'm sure when I tell you, you're going to identify with this purely because it's either fight or flight or freeze or fawn, which is like, being very complacent and not making any noise and walking on eggshells. So these responses are not just physical responses. I'm going to run away from the tiger. So it doesn't need, but it's also an emotional response when I'm being irritable or I'm fighting with somebody or I don't want to talk or I become dissociated, disconnected. I start, being evasive or denying or, for example, during COVID, during the pandemic, I had a lot of people being paralyzed saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know if to go left or right. I can't make decisions. I'm paralyzed, emotionally paralyzed as well. These are all trauma responses that are the appropriate responses in the face of trauma because it keeps us in survival. It allows us to be able to deal with the danger, with the situation, with the emotional shock, with the difficulty, with the loss, or with, whatever we're dealing with. And in this response that makes us stay afloat in some way. It doesn't resolve the problem. It doesn't makes us go to a better place, but it allows us to survive. This is actually the place where we start developing addictions as well. This is the responses in which when we continue to do those survival responses, this is where we stay stuck and where addictions begin to develop as well.
So I want to talk about the pathway into addiction from trauma. But before we do, I want to pause a moment. You mentioned that trauma can either be minimized or overused. And I want to talk about what both of those could look like. I know for me personally, I minimized my trauma. It wasn't until I went into treatment at age 32 that I was in a therapeutic environment that I actually understood that things that I'd experienced throughout my life were traumas. I think because I grew up in a nice area with a roof over my head and I had a private education, I didn't think that I qualified to be able to say that I'd had any sort of trauma. And yet there were all of these micro traumas along the way that I had then just drank on to sort of numb the pain, to avoid. And over time that had built so much until it exploded. And I eventually, was addicted to alcohol and then hit my rock bottom. So let's talk about first, the impacts of minimizing trauma. What can that look like?
I mean, such a beautiful description of what you said, because sometimes it's not even a one big event that it's so obvious, like the earthquake or the war or the death of a dear, a close family member. But it's like these micro aggressions or micro traumas that happen over time. Maybe we were born into a household that didn't give us to cover the needs when growing up, or maybe we had micro abusive relationships with our parents, or maybe there was this ongoing bullying or rejection or lack of sense of belonging to the community or the family that you grew up. These are all micro traumas that keep accumulating over time. And as you said very well, it allows us to develop responses in order to protect ourselves from the pain. So what do? We deny, we dissociate, we know how, we get triggered, we fight back, we have anger responses, we disconnect emotionally from the other people, we mistrust, we lose trust in the other, and then we don't have like close, significant relationships. So all these are consequences of protecting ourselves from the pain. And one of them is actually, like you said, numbing the pain. So, with any kind of repetitive behavior or addictive behavior that for a moment, for seconds, or for a very short period of time, numbs or disconnects from the pain. And then we need more, and then we need more, and then we know to continue to be able to survive. And then for some people, this is the path until for most people, it gets to this very dark night of the soul, or this very, very extreme moment of touching rock bottom. And that's really when we are able to make decisions of what we do with that. Either we stay in that dark, cold place, or we said, we come to this space of absolute radical acceptance, which we will talk, because that's one of the first steps that we do. But then there's the other, possibility, which is the overly understanding of, what trauma is, and they're constantly living in a very traumatic experience and already identifying, an ongoing traumatic situation, abuse, and all kinds of things that we develop, that we are living in an abusive or in a threatening or in a dangerous, not safe environment. And our trauma responses keep happening over and over and over. And that also leads us into touching, getting to a place in which we don't, we're like deciding, are we going to continue like this, or we have to stop and say, what are we doing with ourselves? So either way, there's more than one way. It's not just the overexposed or underexposed. It's not just the micro traumas or the over, but everything. There's a whole range, and for each person is a little bit different. But they all these behaviors do get to the point of saying there's going to be a moment in which the pain that we have in protecting ourselves from the trauma is bigger than the trauma itself. And that's when we do something, right? There's a saying by a writer, Anais Nin, that says, when the pain of staying in the bud and not flowering, not, growing, is stronger than the actual risk of coming out, that's when you decide to say, I have to do something, right?
Absolutely. You mentioned disassociation a little earlier, and I really relate to that as well. I think for so many years, I told myself that there was nothing wrong and I disconnected from reality. And I know so many people that I've come across in my life who, almost jokingly say, "Oh, we're just going to push that away. We're going to put that in the no-no corner. We'll deal with that later." What's the danger in that? What happens to the soul when we keep ignoring this message?
I can tell you that I used to be the king of dissociation, the queen of dissociation. I know all about it. Actually, early on in my research, I would write papers about dissociation because and you know what? I'm grateful because I think we also have to be thankful for the tools that we use in order to protect ourselves. Sometimes dissociation, disconnection, and numbing is the only way we have in order to walk and to go through the painful experiences that we're living, right? So let me give you an example of an extreme case. If a little girl is being sexually abused, the fact that this little girl, I mean, I have many patients like that, were able to dissociate at the time of the abuse or the ongoing abuse is the reason why these girls are still alive. And these girls are still able to connect emotionally to themselves these days, even though because they had to use, a protective response such as dissociation, which is the disconnection between the mind and the emotion. It's almost like you're physically there, but emotionally you're gone. It's being able to go through the motions of whatever is happening, but emotionally not being present. So, we all do dissociations. We all have this behavior for bigger or smaller situations. Like when you're driving from point A to point B, and then I ask you, do you know how you got to point B? I don't even remember. I was just driving and I was someplace else. That's an example of dissociation, right? But we have larger, and more extreme cases of dissociation, like when you're really not even remembering who you are or not being connected at all with anything that you're feeling. And there are such people that create such distance and such disconnect from their emotions that they cannot feel pain, but they cannot feel happiness. They cannot feel love. They cannot have a space of intimacy, emotional intimacy, or emotionally connect. So these are behaviors that can be ongoing. And some people live like that. I mean, it's possible to have a life like that. Yes, it's a life that doesn't have the whole range of emotions and the richness of, what you can have in connectivity and in connection with others, but it comes from a very, very painful place.
I often talk about the invisible armor that we put on. It's a part of these maladaptive strategies that we wear this invisible armor to keep us protected from the world. But then that armor sits over our heart. We can't connect to ourselves. And there's that real sense of, I think, a lot of my own clients, they'll be moving through the world with this sense of, I have everything I've ever wanted, and yet I feel so empty inside. And I think that's what you were talking to, right? This deep sense of disconnection.
And one example of that, sometimes we see it, I don't know if you have it in your practice, but I see it sometimes in people that are very, very successful in their work, that have been workaholics all their lives, and they're running and going places and always having a bigger goal and making sure that they never stop to feel. So they get to places, right, in which everybody on the outside and society might say, oh, but you have everything and you've accomplished so much. Yes, but the internal connection, the internal, more intimate, more meaningful connection with the other and with themselves is not there. Why? Because the moment that person stops and really opens a space to connect with their heart, the pain that can come from there, it's so unbearable that they're not able to do it. It's intolerable. That's why, for example, I've had patients that have gone through life, through the motions of life, like growing up. I have this woman growing up, she got married, she had a daughter. She was in the park one day and she sees her daughter from afar in the children's park playing with other kids. And at that moment, all of a sudden, she gets flooded with memories of herself being her daughter's age, playing in the park. and remembering that some of the kids that were playing with her began to become abusive and then sexually abused her. But up until that moment, she was going through the motions of life and she was living a normal, successful life. And it's only when there's maybe a situation that is very triggering, or maybe when there's like, an extreme moment of like that forces you to connect with some memory or some emotion, or when you begin to dive into a more intimate relationship with a partner, for example, or you have children, that something triggers into, wow, how am I feeling about this? What's happening with me? That, it cracks open certain emotions or certain memories, and then, the flooding of emotions come up.
And often, if it does feel too much, then we revert back to those other maladaptive strategies like we spoke about before. I often say, working with people, it's like we have these internal coping strategies and external coping strategies. So for me, my external coping strategy was alcohol. For other people, it might be social media. It might be jumping from one relationship to another. And then this disassociation we're talking about, that's really an internal coping strategy. The other one I want to talk about before we get into your book, Dr. Edith, is perfectionism. This was a big one for me, and perhaps even along with that, people pleasing, because I think that a huge number of our listeners would relate to either one of those or both of those. Can we talk a little bit about how perfectionism and people pleasing can also be incredibly destructive?
I love these questions because usually people don't talk about this. And I want to ask you, because it's a difficult topic to talk about, because what's behind perfectionism? What's the feeling behind the person? And I'm sure you can talk about from your own experience, but also, with the people that you work with. When somebody is pushed to get to these levels of being perfect and pushing themselves. I'm not enough. I'm not perfect. I have to do more and I have to show more and I have to please everybody around me. What's underneath that? Do you know?
Well, for me, it was a deep sense of I am not enough. I am not worthy. I am not lovable.
Because what if you were not perfect enough? What would happen?
For me, when I was a child, I felt that I needed to be perfect in order to gain my parents' validation, attention, and love.
Exactly. So what's underneath, that's absolutely, I agree with you. And that I had some of that too growing up. And what's underneath that is a deep sense of rejection and a deep sense of not belonging, or even of shame, right? Which are the universal wounds that we all have. We basically have, I would say, 5, 6 universal wounds of fear, rejection, not belonging, shame, eh, um, there's a couple more that I'm going to come up with right now. I can't remember, but it's this sense that we'll do whatever it takes in order to be accepted. We'll do whatever it takes in order to feel that we belong, that we're part of a family, that we're part of something. And that might mean that we create this narrative, or we learn from our parents or from the grown-ups that are raising us to say, if you are in this and this and that way, then you will receive the love and attention and validation that you deserve. Like, I'm not deserving, or I'm not capable, or I'm not enough, because the acceptance is conditioned, right? It's not like you're accepted for who you are. It's you're accepted if you are being do. So perfectionism is such a programming that we have, in the sense that the same with being a little bit obsessive about cleaning or about doing, right? It comes together a little bit. People that are very perfectionistic can have a little bit of that obsessive quality. And it also, having that sense of, not, of being complacent, having this fear. That fear is the other one. Fear of, I'm not being enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not being loved. And that's why we become amazingly skilled at all these ways of being, to make sure, we're thinking, we're making sure that people around us are loving us, or that are accepting us, or are validating who we are or our very existence. So, why would you give up trying to be perfect, or why would you give up trying to please the people around you? Because if you're not like that, the loss or the danger or the threat of like being left alone or being left alone in the woods or rejected completely or not belonged or not being seen is so great, right? That we develop the skills. So I absolutely, and this is totally a definition of trauma. I mean, this is core trauma from very early on.
I feel like this is the perfect segue then, Dr. Edith, into discussing your book, The Unexpected Gift of Trauma. Let's talk about first the title. How did you come up with that, and what did you mean behind it?
Yes, I actually came up with the title on deep meditation. I was almost sleeping, like I was half asleep, and this came to me. But it really comes from many, many years of thinking about post-traumatic growth and wanting to communicate this to people and working with patients, with couples, with families, with communities that have come from very, very deep adversity, difficult, challenging situations, and seeing how the processing of that has led them, each in their own way, to a place of not only recovery or doing better, but actually growing and transforming in ways that I could have never imagined or they could have never imagined. So the process of that, those stages are very similar to each. Everybody has their own way of doing their own style, but these five stages are very, very similar to everybody that I've seen. And I keep, every time I talk about it, and the more I talk about it, and the more people read my book, people say, yes, this has happened to me. This is exactly how it is. And people tell me all the time, how come in the title you're having the word gift and the word trauma in the title? And I said, that's exactly the message. That sometimes, the way I believe and I see trauma is that trauma doesn't have to be a life sentence. That if we understand that trauma is an opportunity, an opening for possibilities, is the actual platform to get to a more elevated, more grown, developed possibility of transforming, of transcending. It really makes a big difference, and it gives you a sense of hope that you might not have otherwise. So it's really a gift.
I would love to talk about the 5 stages, but before we go there, I would love to know, in your opinion, why is it that 2 people can have such different responses to trauma? I'll give you an example. Say that somebody experiences a terrible trauma, such as losing a child. One person will be crippled by that trauma and move into a really dark place, deep, dark depression, unable to get out of it. The other person will use that pain as a motivation. Maybe they start a charity, they create something to really, do you know what I mean? Like they turn their pain into purpose, and
of course.
Why? What's the difference there? Why such different experiences or responses?
Yes, imagine that's the very question that I started this whole journey with, Ash. This is when I was in my early teens. I grew up with a family and with a community of immigrants and refugees and survivors of war. And I would ask myself, how is it possible that this person went to war and that person went to the same war, and this one is very depressed and stuck in their lives, and this other one is the leader of the community, thriving, growing, creating organizations, helping other people? And I said, what makes a difference? I want to know. I want to know for myself, and I want to know for the patients that I work with, and to help other people. And that has really guided my whole work all these years. So I'm very grateful that that you can see this question as well. And what I've come up with, first you have to read the book, because the answer is there. And the answer is not just one response. There's a series of variables that makes a difference. So for example, one of the things that we know is that trauma is relational And the healing of trauma is relational. So having a sense of connection, having people around, and being able to have a safe space to be validated and recognized and accepted for the trauma that you went through makes a huge difference. Another, we call them kind of protective factors or variables that actually facilitate this 5-stage process that I'm talking about. The openness to receive help, the level of spirituality, believe it or not, how spiritual you are and how much you are open to develop spirituality also predicts for a better outcome for trauma. People that have been that are more capable of thinking about their trauma. It's called rumination, like the rumination about their own issues, but not overly obsessed, but having enough time to talk about it, to think about it. And mostly a sense of community and belonging, in which you feel that you're part of something else, that you're not alone and lonely and fragmented and disconnected from navigating this process of healing makes a big, big, big difference. So it's not, as you can, and that's without talking, a whole other conversation has to do with the intergenerational trauma and all the traits and all the information that we inherit that is actually stored in our body and that is part of the information that we carry in our DNA, and how we become aware and conscious of this and how much we want to transform that information as well. So as you can see, there's so many variables that are physical and emotional and spiritual and cognitive that really make it for what's the difference between the outcome. But it's not just one. That's why I always talk about it from a systemic I talk about trauma and healing from a very systemic point of view. This is not like a one individual with themselves in their mind. I don't believe it's just that, because then you would say, oh, well, the person that is smart or intelligent or have the cognitive abilities can do it, and the person that is not, and it's not like that. It's all these things that I'm talking about that encompasses. And it's still a beautiful thing to see, because eventually I think that every single person can go through this process of healing and can get to post-traumatic growth if we are able to assist and to accompany and to facilitate this process.
So you have lived experience with generational trauma. Your grandparents were Holocaust survivors. Having that understanding, what can somebody do to protect their own mental health and well-being if they have that understanding that there's generational trauma? Maybe they haven't experienced trauma themselves that they're very aware of, but there's undercurrents that are playing out.
Not only that people might experience undercurrents, but there's something that nowadays that we know in science, the epigenetics, which is really the understanding of how the information that we have in our DNA gets manifested in our behaviors and and the way that we function. So even without us knowing, in a very unconscious way, we might be performing, and we might be making decisions based on those traumas that we're inheriting from our parents, grandparents, and ancestors. So one of the things that I'd say is that in today's age, it is our responsibility to really take the time to become aware of who we are, what we carry, what has been our own journey of life, but also where we come from and what are the beautiful things that we inherit from our ancestors, the treasures that we carry, but also the traumas. Sometimes, I've had patients that they've discovered secrets that have gone from generation to generation, beliefs about, how the world functions, what is being a man or being a woman, or what it means to be a parent, or, how do you understand you have to make decisions in life, all of this that might be informed by what we inherit from our intergenerational trauma. And then the moment that we take the time to really look into that, to really make it conscious, to bring it into the surface, then we are much more capable to decide, I want to take this with me. I don't want to take this with me. I don't want to repeat the cycle. One of the things that I do, and I do this very seriously, is that I don't want to repeat the cycle of trauma that has that has been part of my parents' life and my grandparents' life, and and I don't want to give that to my children and my grandchildren. So I become what I came up with this term called the alchemist, the intergenerational alchemist. I'm the one that is gonna transcend, and it's gonna really change the way that we see inheriting trauma. And that's the invitation that I ask of anyone to say, what is it that you want to do with your life? You have the capability and the responsibility to really look into that and then decide for yourself what do you want to do with it.
It really is, isn't it? We can't blame ourselves for what happened to us, but we must take responsibility to be able to change the course.
Absolutely.
Dr. Edith, you mentioned before, as part of your 5-step process, radical acceptance. And I want to speak about this a little bit more, particularly from the lens of addiction, because for a lot of addicts, dishonesty is ingrained because of the sneaky behavior over years and years, whether you're sneaking alcohol or you're stealing money or you're just lying about certain behaviors. And we know that lies compound over time. Once you start telling a lie, it becomes easier, and then you eventually start to believe your own lies, which is where we get into this really difficult part of saying, what do you mean I don't need help, I'm fine? You're clearly not fine, but the dishonesty is so deeply ingrained that radical acceptance is it's so hard to get to that point. So how do we get there?
Yeah. And, I think every time I get asked these questions, I think that the first stage of radical acceptance in this 5-stage to get to healing is the hardest, because it requires so much courage, and it requires for you to trust that you can let go of all those armors and all those skills and all those tools that you had to protect yourself from feeling, and allow yourself to really open up. And I tell you, that's why I think people don't do that unless the suffering is so much and you're so in the rock bottom that there's no more going down. There's only going up from there, right? Like you cannot go any lower, And then you say, okay, I have no choice. I have no choice but to either stay in the bottom or begin to see something else. And I don't think people do that because they want to. It's very rare to see somebody saying, oh yes, let me look into my pain and let me see what it feels like to sit with my shadow and with my very dark place, because it's so much fun. No, it's not fun at all. It's very, very, very painful. I don't think we should do it alone. I don't think we can do it alone. I think that's why the second stage has to do with safety and protection, with really connecting with others. But I think this place of admitting to yourself that you're lying, or that you're in an addictive behavior, or that you're hopeless, or that you don't have the tools anymore to protect yourself, or to keep running away from the pain that you don't want to see, and from the pain that you don't want to feel. I think that's what happens. I don't even think that in radical acceptance we really even have the whole story, or we know why we're being addicted or why we're lying. We're not there yet. It's a very, very basic place of saying, you know what? I'm here. I'm hopeless. I'm in the bottom of the hole. That's it. I mean, I've tried everything to avoid. I've tried everything to dissociate. I've tried everything not to feel the pain or to pretend nothing is happening. And it's not working anymore. That's what I mean by being completely, like, radically honest. We're not even at the place where we can tell the story. We're not even at the place where we can say, oh yes, I was dissociating because I was, having a childhood trauma we're not there at all. We don't even have the language in that stage to be able to say that. It's more saying like, I'm here. That's it. There's nothing else I can do. This surrender, right? In the 12-step model, I think they would call it surrender in some way. I found out later that there's some equivalences in this.
Definitely. And, when you were talking about that radical acceptance, I was thinking of step 1. We admitted we were alcoholic and we were powerless over alcohol. And I think to myself, it's the hardest step to get. Like you were saying, radical honesty, it's the hardest step to get. But once you fully accept, then the rest of the steps, it's like you become willing to do whatever it takes because you know what the problem is. So therefore you're willing to step into a solution.
And as you know very well, I'm sure, it's not a linear process. It's not like, we go from step 1 to step 2 no, we go 1, then we go 2, then we go back to 1 to 0, and then we go back to 2, and then we go, so that I see it more like a spiral that we go around, and then we go the next round, and then we go the next round, and then we revisit these things because we're not perfect. We can go fall back into some of the addictive behavior or some of the lying and some of the things. That doesn't mean that we're doing wrong. That means that we're almost like retraining our brain because it took a lot of effort to program ourselves to lie and to protect ourselves. Why are we lying when we're in an addictive behavior? Because we're so afraid of the consequences. We're terrified of the consequences. Nobody wants to lie. It's not the natural thing to do. It's just that the fear of what would come if we tell the truth is so big that we think we might die, if we tell the truth. That's how big. The bigger the lie is, the more fear we have underneath it. So, and I say all of this with so much compassion, because I know the suffering that comes with that. So, some people live double lives. It's like you have a whole life in one way and a whole other life, a parallel life, because those lives cannot even, look at each other because they cannot, they cannot even be accepted. So, people do all kinds of things in order to stay alive. So
of course.
Yeah.
And this is why being able to reach out and get help is so important because like you were saying, that programming that's created within our own minds, it's very hard to think of a way out when you're operating from that programming. That's why getting somebody to support you, whether it's a group, a therapist, a coach, whatever it is, to help you see the path forward because you don't have that map. It's like there is a roadmap out of here. You don't have it. You need to find somebody who has it so that you can then be guided out of it. Yet isolation seems to be so strong. I know so many women who stay stuck because unconsciously they push everyone away. They're like, no.
Yeah, but they push people away. Sorry that I interrupted.
Go for it.
Because the shame that comes with it is so big, and that's why I say, like, when we interact with people, we never know what the other person is struggling with because as you say, behind the smile, behind the smile, I love the title of your podcast. It's like, okay, behind the smile, there's so much going on, right? The person can be struggling with so much shame and saying, no, I can't even begin to ask for help because what is the other one going to think of me if I tell them that I've been in an abusive relationship all my life? Or what are the other persons going to think of me if I tell them that, that, I don't know, I cut myself or I hurt myself or I've been drinking for all these years. Like, how am I going to even say something like that, right? So it takes also courage to ask for help. And like you said, the second stage of safety and protection, what I'm saying, the second step in this model, it doesn't have to be just a therapist. Yeah, of course, I always would want the person to look for professional help, but it can be a family member that you can talk, that you can reach out. It can be a mentor. It can be your yoga teacher. It can be a retreat that you go to. It can be your spiritual guide in the moment that you're talking. It can be your best friend, so, but really the other that can see better than you, that map. And that knows that there's a map. And I love having this. That's why I say it's like a roadmap to know that you're getting to post-traumatic growth. It's like, this is clear. There's a map. There exists. There's hope. And you can do it,
So good. Let's talk about spirituality a little bit more because when you mentioned spirituality, I lit up from the inside out. This has been the biggest game changer within my own recovery journey. The 12 steps is very much a pathway to spirituality. I was saying that to somebody last night and she said, what do you mean? She was asking me about 12 step and I was just saying, well, that's really the purpose of it. It's actually not really about not drinking at all. Like, yeah, that's obviously you don't drink, but it's about finding your higher power, your connection to source. And that is something that has continued to evolve and grow for me year on year. And it's what I'm most passionate about sharing with other people now today. Talk to me, Dr. Edith, about why spirituality is so important for post-traumatic growth.
First of all, is the outcome, is one of the known outcomes of post-traumatic growth. Second of all, is a known evidence-based protective factor against trauma. And third, in my own personal and professional practice, I have always had my spiritual practice and have been very spiritual over the years. And I would have like my scientific academic self and my spiritual self kind of dissociated until I realized that I had to put them together and I have to integrate them. As I was integrating things in my life and as I was integrating elements in my own practice, I realized that until I include the whole spirituality, my patients and my communities would not get to that level of post-traumatic growth because this is really what it's needed. We can only go so far when we're recovering and when we're becoming resilient and when we're saying, okay, I'm doing better. But there's more. There's something more because it's not just about us. It's not just about me, the individual. It's when I am going beyond myself and I start connecting. And when I'm connecting with the other and with the community and with my context, I'm connecting with the understanding that there's something bigger than me, that I'm part of something bigger than myself. And when we get to that understanding, then life changes, because you say, okay, this is not a limited belief that, okay, why am I waking up in the morning and doing one thing or the other? Yes, might have like your profession or your vocation but there's something else that people discover when they get to post-traumatic growth, which is like a life purpose. And it's almost like a life mission. And invariably, this purpose and mission goes beyond yourself. It's like, okay, I've learned how to overcome my addiction, or I've learned how to live with skills that I didn't know I had before, or talent, or really powers and, that I didn't know, superpowers that I developed. I also want to help other people. And you see it every time, people that get to this, they say, I want to help the other. And that comes from a place of understanding that we're part of something bigger and that there's like some, maybe a higher self, or you believe in something, or you come up with understanding there's a system of a set of beliefs that you're entering and you're using and we hold on to, that really gives you an organized way of seeing life. And it's a bigger connection than just the thought. It's, there are many ways of talking about this, but what I love is some of the research that has been done. Columbia University, Dr. Lisa Miller, she has put a lot of people under the MRIs and has seen how even physically there's a development of the prefrontal cortex that gets thicker when we develop our spirituality. Wow. Isn't that amazing? I love it. Yeah. And that really allows for people to say, okay, when I'm fearing something, when I'm having to face adversity, spirituality really helps.
So when you're sitting down with a patient or a client and explaining this to them and they have no spiritual practice whatsoever, how do you support them to get started? What would you suggest?
So the third step in this model is called new narratives. This is where the person goes out into the world, and I encourage them to say, okay, go look for something that you might like, that is going to begin to help you try something new, because the way you understood the world until now is not working anymore, or it broke, or it got shattered. So what else is out there? So maybe you're reading new books, you're joining new, groups, or it's almost trying new clothes and saying, and, people can go from Buddhism to Christianity to this, or go to, meditation, into breathing, into cold plunges, into, there's so much that you can do, or going to retreats in the middle of the forest. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're finding new ways of understanding yourself and life, and you're trying new things to see which really resonates with you. And this is what happens. And I encourage people to, and of course I help them, to giving readings and places and going and trying new things. And then they come back and say, oh, I like this, I don't like that. And how you incorporate new, and then you begin to have relationships with people that are, also doing that, or joining groups that are also doing that. And this is how you develop it. So it's not coming from me. it's coming from them. And it's like being curious about how you're going to develop this, and, you know, encouraging to say, what else is out there? How are you expanding your world, you know?
I love that so much. It's like trying different things, because for some people it might be meditation, it might be yoga. For other people it might be deep diving into A Course in Miracles or some other sort of spiritual text. Like, you really need to find what works for you. And that also includes finding the right teachers for you, you know, the people who you really resonate with. And it's a felt experience. Like, you know, deep inside whether or not that message is resonating with you or whether it's not, and just listening and being guided by that in and of itself is a spiritual practice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the key is always to do it in relationship with others. I mean, this is not, again, it's not an isolated journey. It's not a fragmented journey. It's how you share with others in all these explorations.
And what does your own spiritual practice look like these days, Dr. Edith?
Oh my God. I'm a very, very curious person. So I try so many things, because for me to recommend to my patients and to the people, I try it first. You know, I don't recommend before me dipping into it or testing it or something. And then I say, okay, this is you can go try and tell me what you think. So it depends. I mean, right now I'm diving into a more understanding the development of the soul and, you know, the mission of the soul. But, you know, I've gone from Kabbalistic to Buddhist. I've gone to India many times. I've gone to Bhutan. I've gone to, you know, there was a time of like really opening for psychedelic exploration as well, and seeing where that takes you. So honestly, I cannot say one thing. Where my thing is curiosity. I'm very, very curious, very open, and very much into connecting. For example, for me, nature is key. Like, for me, being part of nature and connecting with nature, either the ocean or the mountain and the trees and the grass and the animals, like, it's really, really essential for my staying grounded and staying almost like having the roots, and then also growing spiritually. And I think also having a practice every day. I think this is for most people, having some sort of moment in the morning to connect with myself, to practice my breathing, my meditation, to remember who I am, you know, and to remember my soul's purpose in this life, and then taking from there. So
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Yes, a morning practice is so vital. Dr. Edith, as we come to the end of our conversation and our time together today, is there anything that you feel that you'd really love to share with our listeners before we wrap up?
Okay. So, you know, one message that I wanted to give that I think it's important to remember is that when we are in trauma, some people really think there's no options and it's the end of the road. And the important message that I want to give is that there's hope and there's a light at the end of a tunnel. And if we know this, or the people around us know this, they can hold that hopefulness for us. You know, because sometimes the person in the trauma or the person that is going to addiction doesn't know this. But if you have people around that say, oh, there's something like what Dr. Shiro said about post-traumatic growth. So even if the person doesn't see it, you know that it's there. So for me, also part of writing a book and part of talking about it is providing the language for knowing that there's a roadmap, and providing the hope to say, there is hope, there is a possibility, there are alternatives, there are ways of getting to a place that it's even better than you can imagine, and it's doable. That it's doable.
What a beautiful message to end our conversation on today, Dr. Edith Shiro. Thank you so, so much. If people want to buy your book, The Unexpected Gift of Trauma, or to track you down, to follow you, where can they go?
So this is the book, and please find it on Amazon. There's also a workbook that comes with it. This is the workbook.
Fantastic.
And it's a beautiful accompaniment for, you know, when you're going through the process. On Amazon, on libraries all over. It's translated in 12 languages. So You can choose the language that you want to read it in. It's on audiobook also. And you can go to my website, dredithshiro.com, and there's a lot of information there. I'm also giving a certification for people that want to really take this in and specialize in it. And I do support groups all over the world. So, and conferences everywhere. So, I'm always happy to connect with people. There's always people writing me from everywhere about the book and about their process and about how they're getting to post-traumatic growth. So looking forward to connecting.
Amazing. I will pop all of that information in the episode show notes. We say here on Behind the Smile that when we recover loudly, no one needs suffer in silence. So thank you so, so much for all that you do in your time today. Thank you.
You too. Thank you. Thank you for being an example of post-traumatic growth. I love it.
Oh, thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.